The Exchange on Deep Dive.
Welcome once again to our discussion on Capi Talk 100.4 FM. This is The Exchange. And this evening we are unpacking issues around sugar tax or sugar content tax and its potential impact on public health. And in particular, we want to talk about the ring fencing of funds that will be used for medical purposes. So let's deep dive into the conversation. Joining me in the conversation are two experts, Pascal, Mandeya and Nyasha Kaseke, who are going to be sharing their insights on this critical issue. Let's do it. Good evening to you, Pascal. How are you?
Good evening, Wendy. I'm very well. How are things in the studio?
Things are well, thank you. No complaints on this side, and really good to have you in the conversation. We will be joined by Nyasha momentarily. We're just trying to connect with him. So in the meantime, Pascal, let's start with you. What are your thoughts on the implementation of sugar content tax and how it can impact public health in Zimbabwe?
There are two things to this. Let me appeal to your lawyerly side. I'm sure you're still a lawyer.
I am indeed.
The Constitution, Section 302, talks about what happens to money that is collected by government. It talks about the Consolidated Revenue Fund, where it says all taxes collected by government must go into that fund, and makes only two exceptions, where the money must be going to some other designated fund, or where the collecting entity must then retain that money for its own expenses. So in all Westminster type governments, we're talking about people who used to be colonized or affiliated with the British, Australia, your Nigeria, and so forth. This is the standard procedure. All government monies must go into one pot. And then depending on the allocations that would have been made via the budget, they are then paid out through the Appropriation Bill or Appropriation Act. So for me, that is not the best way of doing it. What the minister did by creating or ring fencing that is basically creating some sort of a retained fund. And one of the things that he did 2 years ago, as we said, we want to get rid of this habit of this fund. There are certain bad things that happen when agents for collection start keeping that money. I hope the police are not listening, or the ones that were there in 2007 are not listening. We had a problem where, because of some resource mobilization issues, police were allowed to retain some of the money they were collecting from, motorists and whatever. And it became problematic because they were now over-collecting. They were now incentivized to go and collect, and then they were buying new cars and whatever. But in the justice system, there are other players who were not getting money from treasury, like the prison. So we then had a dysfunctional economy where motorists felt police are being overzealous, but at the same time, for the whole government system to operate, others were not getting money. So it's not a good thing when you have these retention funds, because there are certain other very important arms of government that are not agents for collection. When we talk about an agent for collection, we are saying even though taxes are paid to government, there are specific institutions within government and outside of government that will be appointed as agents for collection. For instance, for value-added tax, the person selling you a product or a service collects that on behalf of government, and then they remit it. Same thing with for personal income tax. Your employer collects that and remits for government. So if we now have a situation where an agent is now collecting for direct use, it confuses even the public. Let me bring in, please allow me while our colleague is joining us. Let me bring you an example of a confusion that is now created by people collecting and appearing to be using that, the infamous broadcasting services tax. ZBC was appointed as an agent for collection way back. people actually don't realize that that tax is not levied by ZBC. ZBC is just collecting on behalf of government. Unfortunately, the politicians, because of the under-allocations that were happening to the national broadcaster, they would then justify collection of that tax and say, because we need to fund this. In reality, by definition, a tax is basically money that is collected by government from its citizens and companies for no direct benefit. They don't have to, you don't have to be benefiting anything from a tax. Like when you pay income tax, you actually don't know what that money is going to be used to. But then when we mix up and then we start thinking, no, if this tax is owed this and that, I must be seeing the benefit. We already have a problem. There are three F's for taxation where most of the taxes get their names. You are taxed either on income, on expenditure, or on wealth. Unfortunately, when a tax gets a name based on what's being taxed, we automatically assume that now this tax must now be used towards that. But then imagine...
I hear you, Pascal. Let me just come in there. I think Nyasha has joined us in the conversation, so allow me to just interject and welcome Nyasha Kaseke into the conversation. Nyasha, good evening and welcome to the discussion.
Good evening, and also good evening to listeners.
Wonderful. Nyasha, would you like to add your perspective on the sugar tax? I'm sure you're following Pascal's submissions there.
Okay. What I can say is, to complement what Pascal was saying, if a tax is being levied on a certain product, it is either to deter the consumption of that product or it's just general for revenue generation for government. So if we look in terms of our sugar tax, it's going to deter that, but the way how it is being levied is not going to deter the consumption of sugar. Why I'm saying so is very simple. It's a flat tax. Whether you consume a product with less sugar, you are going to pay the same what tax. So there's no way that tax can now be used to deter the things, the obesity, the things such as is to do with other diseases, for example, high blood pressure, etc. It is no longer being used that, but which means that the main reason for having that tax is for revenue generation. Now, if I want to complement what Pascal has been saying, is that we are now collecting that revenue for a specific purpose. In this case, it is supposed to be helping the healthy sector, more specifically in terms of the cancer procurement of the equipment that are going to be used in terms of cancer to equip what is available in terms of Paranyatwa and also in terms of Pilo Hospital. But what is now happening and why the public is actually concerned about this is that they are not really seeing how the money or how the funds are being applied and how they are also being used in terms of the treatment of cancer, the medication, etc. If we have got a follow-up in terms of this, you now realize that even the human rights lawyers, doctors, have also written to say that we have collected 30.8 million last year by December. What have we actually acquired for us to actually treat towards the cancer? Because we have said that this revenue that we are going to generate from this sugar tax is supposed to be meant for this. And this is why we are now seeing a bit of an outcry in terms of the public. And now if you look in terms of this, it's actually becoming heavy in terms of companies which are producing these items which are actually using what is the sugar. If you look in terms of other countries that are almost having the same tax that we are talking about, UK and South Africa, they actually give a threshold and say that if a product has got maybe 5 grams or less of sugar, it is exempted from paying what sugar tax. But if it has got more than 5 grams per 100 milliliters of what of the drink or the liquid that is being produced, it is now going to pay a certain form of what tax as a way of deterring the consumption of that product. But look, in terms of how we've implemented, it's a bit different, which means it is meant for revenue generation, which is now supposed to be meeting those purposes. Henceforth, we need to ring fence the money that we are collecting from sugar tax and also put it to the specific purpose that it has been said that it is being collected for.
I think that's the million-dollar question. Many of our listeners have been asking, where are the ring-fenced funds? So perhaps I think, it would be very, instructive to get into, I think, what happened as recently as yesterday with plans to roll out a raft of measures to revitalize local pharmaceutical industry being announced by Dr. Mswere following yesterday's post-cabinet briefing. Let's talk a little bit about the establishment of the revolving pharmaceutical fund. Pascal, I want to come to you there. This is aimed to improve, the growth of the pharmaceutical value chain, as well as to fund, issues around treatment, drugs, and public agencies, as well as the public sector. How are the funds going to be ring-fenced and come into this pharmaceutical revolving fund? Does that solve the issue that you're talking about, that all the funds are being put into one pot and then labeled one thing, but then having various uses? Does a setting up of a revolving fund for pharmaceutical sector or value chain solve that?
I don't think it will, and I'm actually against this idea of ring fencing. All I'm just saying is, if our priorities are right, even if people don't buy sugar, even if that money is not collected, we should take whatever funds are immediately available, whether it's from duties levied at the border, whether it's from IMT and whatever, and apply to the critical areas first. Our challenge is our money is not enough to meet the things that we call are critical. So every time there is an opportunity or there's a crisis somewhere, I think the minister, with all due respect, then does something that seems fantastic for that moment. But this does not work. Because long term, like I was going to say, I didn't actually finish the point. The point I wanted to make regarding the army, for instance, is the army never collects tax except from its own employees. But they are probably the most important institution insofar as Zimbabwe is concerned. They defend the territorial integrity of the country. So if we have a proliferation of these ring-fence taxes, how are we going to look after these people? There is a reason why there is that consolidated revenue fund. And when I look at it, I think it's a gray area. It has not been challenged, but it's probably unconstitutional what the minister is doing. Because the two instances where money should not go into the consolidated revenue fund is when it's going into another fund designated for its own purposes, or where it's being retained by the agent for collection. In this case now, it's not the agent for collection, it's not the Ministry of Health that's retaining that. So I think the real problem is the allocations from the ministries don't reflect from the Ministry of Finance don't reflect our priorities. That is probably because we don't collect enough for what we promise ourselves as a country. Therefore, every time there's a crisis, there would be no need for ring fencing anyway, because when he does the budget, he says we are going to collect this and we'll spend it this way. But when the money comes into the bank, the duty of Treasury is to then understand that if we have collected less than we underspent it, who gets what first? So instead of coming to us and telling us that, no, this time we are not taking care of this particular portion because the money wasn't enough, but we have taken care of the health issues, is now appearing to be doing something critical by going against the Constitution. That whole system of retention and allocations outside the consolidated revenue fund does not work at all. So I'm not in support of this move. I believe there's a bit of politicking that's happening, which is why at the end of the day, people would then question. But allow me to go on a bit. The bigger problem we will have is, once we do this, our people will not understand how taxation works, because they start expecting to see some direct benefit from any particular tax. But as I said before, a tax is it's money that's taken from government by government for no particular use. You shouldn't expect to see a specific use of your taxes. But if we create a situation where we say today the money taken on sugar is so much, we need to see it applied, we create a problem now, because every time you want to tax people now, they will then say, I want to see where it's working. And it's got political implications now, because not everyone, including economists, some economists don't actually appreciate that taxes are just that. The government doesn't have to tell you individually to say, I've taken your payee, a cent is going towards security. And it doesn't. They just collect and they distribute via the budget. So we're creating a problem.
By creating this situation for ring fencing. Quite an interesting perspective. Nyasha, I'll ask you to come in there. What are your thoughts on this one? Do you agree that, the funds must just go into the Consolidated Revenue Fund and it ends there? This idea of ring fencing is not proper. It's not constitutional, according to Pascal.
Thanks very much. You now realize that the issue is, do we have enough? And are we going to really properly ring fence the money that we've collected? The answer is no, because we are not collecting enough. And again, we shouldn't be telling the public that we are collecting money for ZBC license and we are going to use this. The public should just see the improvement in terms of the service delivery, the improvement in terms of the provision of goods and services, that the money that is being collected in the form of tax is being used for. And if that is the case, the public will now be happy and be willing to see that. Not to say that we are going to collect this and ring fence in terms of this. There are a lot of things that have happened in Zimbabwe whereby we say money is going to be collected in terms of this, and we are going to ring fence in terms of importation of electricity, we are going to ring fence in terms of this, and most of these things, they did not work. And we always continue experiencing what the problem. Maybe if the money in terms of sugar tax was being collected by the relevant ministry, for example, the Ministry of Health, and now the ministry being tasked to do with that, maybe it would work. But as long as it is going to the coffers and now say that to the treasury, and now say that we're going to ring fence in terms of this, we have already seen a lot of problems happening in terms of doing that. So I actually support Pascal when he says that I think what we have to see is provision of goods and services by government. And if we are seeing that, we now see that the money is working, that they're actually collecting for the different forms of taxes. And this issue of saying we are going to collect a specific tax for this, I think it always causes problems where it is being applied, because it has got some repercussions in terms of how the money is going to be used. And once the money is not going to be used, it causes a lot of havoc in terms of the public, because they always want to see the application and the use of the money.
So quite interesting there. So accountability in terms of results, let's see, a change in our lived realities, not necessarily a breakdown of what money went where. Yeah?
Definitely.
Yes, that's not possible.
That you say that's not possible. Why is that? I thought that's what you were suggesting.
No. Maybe because English is not my first language, you misunderstood. The review process of how government money has been used is part of the budget process, but also the Auditor General then goes after the various ministries to ensure that there's been no loss or fraud and other things. The challenge with that is most of our money, sometimes in difficult years, I think it even went to as far as 90% of the money goes towards salaries. So that doesn't automatically translate into lived realities outside of the people getting the salaries. A policeman will not necessarily perform better because his salary has been increased. Do you see what I'm saying? So, and also,
I follow, yeah.
So, from an individual point of view, let me give you an example of something else that is controversial, so that we understand that when government spends money, it's not the person paying that must see it. The Trababa plus interchange, formerly Mbudzi roundabout.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all of Zimbabwe that used to be stuck there for hours. I remember I once got stuck there for hours. And the person, maybe the people contributing taxes who have never been to Harare, don't appreciate the benefits that we now get when traffic flows freely. So as far as they are concerned, it's not part of their reality. If they had never seen that, they'll probably think it's a waste of money. So the accounting for government money can only be done through audit after use.
Mm-hmm.
There's no shortcut. It's not a perfect way. You can't go to everybody. Unfortunately, we do it even in the media, where the permanent secretary for media on social media sometimes is asked questions which are really not his responsibility to answer. The problem we've got in Zimbabwe is people don't see the big picture. One of the things that we do randomly, if you ask people how much does the government actually collect and spend, the majority of people who hold very high opinions, strong opinions, don't even know how much the government collects. Some people will tell you, no, I think it's about 100 million. For one purposes, those who didn't know, the government they project to collect now 7 point something billion this year, but they're spending 8. So for me sitting here in Harare to expect to know that there's a bridge that has been built in Zingwane using my tax money, it's not going to happen. Only a centralized audit function can make sense of that. That's why you then have Parliament portfolio committees complementing the work that the Auditor General does. But of course, if our expectations outrace our ability to pay that tax, if the government collects less, there are certain areas where it becomes very visible that the money has not been applied here. But government employees are still being paid the bigger portion of that. So how do you see that? Perhaps they're actually getting unhappy because they expect more, even though...
The Exchange on Deep Dive.